You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast, episode 10, season number 4. Alex Bregman to the Cubs, rumors boiling over. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Follow on all the socials, Fly the W670, Twitter, Instagram. Of course, we're on Facebook. You can also email us at flythew670gmail.com. All right, Crawly, we are on a Thursday of Super Bowl week, but the NBA trade deadline and the Major League Baseball hot stove is stealing the headlines away from the big game. So how close are the Cubs to signing Bregman?
Yeah, on the last episode of the Fly the W podcast, we talked about the free agent rumors surrounding the Cubs and Alex Bregman and how they were heating up. Well, since the last time we talked, a few more dominoes have fallen, and we're going to see if we can put all the pieces together. And we have our friend Matt Trueblood from Northside Baseball, and he is here to help us out. Matt, how you doing today, buddy?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Well, Excellent. We're trying to figure this out.
We all are.
And so we know for a fact that the Cubs were looking for more bullpen help. We were wondering if they might sign David Robertson or trade for Robert Suarez, or we didn't know what, but instead they traded for Robert Brasier, who was DFA'd from the Dodgers when LA signs Kirby Yates. So Matt, first off, for people that may not watch a lot of West Coast baseball, why is Brasier a good pickup for the Cubs? Obviously the Dodgers have so much talent, they have to DFA him, but what does he have to offer, and why is he a good fit for the back end of the Cubs bullpen?
They were really not looking at this point for a relief ace, at least per se. They would have taken it if that had fallen into their laps, I'm sure. But they got to a point where once they acquired Ryan Pressly, they'd already made a couple of depth moves. What they really needed was one more person to sort of strengthen that bridge and make sure that, if you're on a 2-game winning streak and you want to extend that to 3, but Porter Hodge and Ryan Pressly have each pitched 2 of the last 3 of the last 4, something like that, that you have someone else with late game experience, a little bit of a mixed skill set, someone who's not strictly about matchups or strictly about any one pitch. Brasier got by mostly as kind of a slider monster when he was in Boston for several years. But it sort of fizzled out that way, got traded over to the Dodgers in the middle of 2023, added a cutter and took off again. And so his pitch profile fits very nicely with what the Cubs already like to do. They'll mix that right in with obviously Tyson Miller, Nate Pearson. That middle relief core just got quite a bit stronger.
All right. And you need those guys to get there. And so, now besides the pitches that he throws, how does the trade with the Dodgers, the Dodgers still had him. They trade him to the Cubs for a player to be named later or cash considerations. But how does it allow the Cubs the kind of flexibility financially they need if they wanted to make another signing like Alex Bregman?
Yeah, that's the big question. It's whereas I think, David Robertson, certainly Robert Suarez, we already know how much he'll make. That would be a trade with the Padres if they were to get him. Those guys would have been more in the upper 7 figures or even touching 10 million for this year. Brasier's only set to make $4.5 million. And we don't know how much yet, but the Dodgers also included money in this trade, sending him to the Cubs. So the Cubs are getting a bit of a discount even on that 4.5. That means whatever amount the Dodgers are paying them, it'll, discount against what counts toward the competitive balance tax line. And that's the number that's become really important. $241 million, the competitive balance tax number, the Cubs are not going to go over this season. And to make sure that they could fit in someone like Alex Bregman, if that does end up panning out, you'd like to have finished out that bullpen with a piece that cost on the lower end of that spectrum from maybe, let's say, 3 million to 10 million. Brasier fits really nicely. And I think they're confident in what he brings, even if it's a notch less than a Robertson or a Suarez. It gives them more flexibility because it's probably about $5 million cheaper too.
Matt, let me ask you, let's stick with the bullpen for a minute. Last year's bullpen got better, at least the eye test, it got better as the season went on. The numbers got really better as the season went on. I don't know that the numbers and the eye test were equal, but in your opinion, based on these signings that we've had, how much better do you feel about the back end of the Cubs bullpen, or the bullpen in general, compared to when we ended the season last year?
I think it's a lot better. And not just because, you sort of mentally replace a guy like Hector Neris with a Ryan Pressly. That is an upgrade, but it's not just about that. Going into last year, the Cubs didn't have enough depth. They weren't ready for Hector Neris and Adbert Alzolay to not work right out of the gate. They struggled badly. Julian Merriweather got hurt. The bullpen was off the rails almost before the season got started. Jed Hoyer said at his end of season press conference that he wanted to approach the bullpen differently this year, which didn't mean plunging a ton of resources into it. What it meant was giving themselves a lot better coverage against possible injuries, against some underperformance. Last summer, they went out and they got Tyson Miller, Jorge Lopez, who is now gone. But, Miller, they also added Nate Pearson and Jack Neely at the trade deadline. And then this winter with Caleb Thielbar, Eli Morgan, and now Pressly and Brasier, they've really substantially increased their depth. Makes a big difference.
Well, I'm glad that you feel that way too. Really quick, Crawly, one more. I want to take Matt back to our conversation with Bregman. I want to get your reaction, Matt, to this tweet from Bob Nightingale. Free agent third baseman Alex Bregman still has no interest in a short-term contract and seeks a 6 or 7 year deal. Your reaction to Bob Nightingale's tweet?
Yeah, I'm guessing folks who are listening to this might have seen that I reported the Cubs made a 4-year offer to Bregman structured around the possibility of opt-outs earlier this week.
Correct.
And that they are at least discussing that form of a deal. That's the kind of a deal the Cubs would be more comfortable with. I don't know that they're going to go to 6 years or to 7, certainly. But I also don't think Bregman really has an offer like that in hand. And it's not totally clear how strong that preference is. Bob has good sources. He's well connected. But sometimes when you're getting into the end stages of a free agency like this, you're going to start to hear conflicting things. And a lot of it is about gaining negotiating leverage.
Right. You're talking about
more plausible that you might go to the other side of the street.
Right. Like the mystery team that nobody, there's a mystery team involved and stuff like that. And this is kind of interesting too, because Dana Brown, the GM for the Astros, he spoke at a luncheon with the media, and twice, this is from our friend Chandler Rome, friend of the pod. He spoke about Bregman in the past tense, saying once that the team lost Bregman, right? So it's one of these things that when you're kind of looking at this right here, it's kind of like, okay, between the Nightingale tweet, this just to me seems like a lot of games. But when I look at this, I see it as kind of like, Boris is kind of throwing a Hail Mary with that Nightingale tweet here, that I'm sure he probably, picked up the phone, called Bob and said, hey, we're looking at a 6-7 year deal, something to that effect, because, the reports were that Arenado and the Cardinals were talking with the Red Sox. So you're trying to look and to say to yourself, okay, what are the potential landing spots for Bregman, right? And right now Houston is again, are they saying they're done? It sure sounds like it. And, as far as Boston, they're kicking the tires on Arenado. So where else would Bregman go?
Yeah. Reaching out to a couple of people, I think Houston would say, don't read too much into what Dana Brown said that day, but it's also partially about not interfering in Bregman's free agency. I think whether he meant to let that slip or not, whether he actually consciously was saying that they're moving on from him or not, I think that is sort of the stance they've adopted. I also think, Bregman may actually have a 6-year offer from the Tigers, or at least there's some indication they'd be willing to go that far. But there's a second question in play too. Bregman, unlike some guys who reach free agency who are just looking to get paid for the first time, he signed a 5-year, $100 million extension with the Astros back in, I believe, 2019. That's what he's coming off of right now. And over the last 2 years, that deal has paid him $28.5 million per year. He doesn't want to take a pay cut from that. If you're talking to him about a 6-year deal, but it's at 150, or as with the Astros deal that we heard about, 156 million in total, that's bringing down his annual average value from what he was just getting paid. There's some indication that especially based on, what his actual preferred destination geographically competitively is, that he would be interested in a shorter term deal if it was the only way he could stay at that 28, 30, maybe even a higher annual average value. He would rather do that, I think, than take, for instance, 6 and 140 like Javier Baez got from the Tigers just a couple of years ago.
Well, here's what Bruce said on Inside the Clubhouse, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And it was right around the time that your article kind of dropped at the same thing. So there was a lot of similarities.
Talk about what the contract looks like for Alex Bregman. It's not 5 or 6 years.
I don't think the Cubs are signing another 6-year deal at this point in time.
Okay.
So what it might look like is, use your imagination. It can be a 1 to 3, exactly like a Cody Bellinger deal last year. Okay. 1 year, second year is player opt out, third year is player opt out, or mutual options with buyouts. Okay. Mm-hmm. Second and third year. Could they be creative? Look, Scott Boras, one of the most creative, powerful agents in the history of the game. Could they come up with a new format for Bregman that gives you 4 option years for both the club and the team? Opt-outs or mutual options, or mutual options with buyouts. Anything is possible right now, I think. But the player getting the money he wants for this year, possibly for the other years, and the flexibility to have an awesome year in 2025 and moving on to another 5-year deal with somebody else for what he considers guaranteed money. These are all things that are probably on the table.
So all on the table here. And so what do you when Dustin and I talked about this last episode, it was kind of like, well, what exactly is this going to look like? Matt, you kind of had some ideas of what this could potentially look like. Can you tell our listeners from your article what that would look like for the Cubs and Alex Bregman, your article on Northside Baseball?
Yeah, I think there are probably multiple options still in play at this point, but the Cubs definitely are interested in a deal, as Bruce alluded to, that would be similar to Cody Bellinger's from last year. Bregman might be in a better position to negotiate right now than Bellinger was. There's more other interest, even if, we've already talked about the situations with the Astros, the Red Sox, the Tigers. He's drawing a little more other interest. He has a little bit more of a defined position, of what he wants. So they may have to stretch it all the way to 4 years, which would be unprecedented for this kind of structure. People have gone 3 years and opt-outs after each before, not just Bellinger, but last year, Matt Chapman ended up with the same style of deal. They're becoming more common. This would push that toward an extreme. And essentially it would be, okay, you don't want to pay that 6-7 year commitment. You buy your way out of that by offering a higher annual average value, plus the extra value for the player in you can opt out anytime within the contract. Maybe that's not after every single year, but certainly it would probably be after 2025. You'd have that opt out and then another one later in the deal. And it just gives him flexibility, and it saves the Cubs from feeling very unhappy about the prospect of paying him $25, $26, $27 million at ages 35 and 36.
Well, as we're kicking around the Bregman to the Cubs possibilities, we also got PECOTA earlier in the week. And PECOTA has the Cubs winning 90-plus games without Bregman. So two-part question for you, Matt. Do you agree with PECOTA that the Cubs are a 90-win team as the roster stands as we are recording this podcast? And if Bregman was added to the team, which I think we all hope that happens, price albeit, how many more wins would Bregman be worth? I mean, are we now talking about a 95, 96 plus win team?
I think you could be. Yeah, it's at that kind of a level. Are they at this moment that 90, 91 win team that PECOTA is projecting? A lot of it comes down to the error bars of any projection like this. I think that's a reasonable forecast of what, how many runs they're going to score and allow this season. I think PECOTA is probably right about that. over the last 2 years, we've seen this team finish with 83 wins twice in a row, looking at a lot of points like they were actually a stronger team than that and giving away some games. We already talked about the improvement in the bullpen. I think they're a more well-rounded offense at this point too, a little more dangerous. Yeah, I could easily see this team winning 90 games even without Bregman. That said, Pacoda's projection for Matt Shaw is not that rosy. He is not part of, or at least not a very big part of the reason why they're projected that well. Not only would bringing Bregman in then be worth, I think it's about 2.5 extra wins relative to Shaw if you just slide him mentally down to Iowa to start the season. But you'd also be looking at a situation where Shaw very likely comes up and plays a significant role replacing someone like a Gage Workman or a Vidal Brujan or Alexander Canario. He's better than any of those players, and he would start to float in the way Javier Baez did in 2015, 2016 as that extra, not quite regular. Now, that all assumes that they don't, as part of signing Bregman, also trade Nico Horner, which is a separate discussion and something that would very likely be in play if they do get a Bregman deal done. But yeah, this is a strong team and much, much deeper than they were a year ago.
Matt, one final question for you here is that when you take a look at it, obviously, you know, I think about this. We just had the 40th anniversary of the '84 Cubs, and people forget they were ripped on a lot for being like the Philadelphia of the Midwest, as Dallas Green brought in all these Phillies players. But now you take a look at it. How attractive is Chicago of a destination for Alex Bregman, knowing that he'll get to play with Kyle Tucker, that Ryan Presley's on there, that Caleb Thielbar's on there? I mean, just having some familiarity. It's not like you're walking into a brand new clubhouse and not knowing anybody.
Yeah, I think the Cubs feel like that's a really strong selling point for them. Not only the people you just listed, but Dansby Swanson and Bregman were first and second in the 2015 MLB draft. And they both came from SEC schools. It was certainly a rivalry at the time, but it didn't mean that they felt enmity toward each other. I think there's a lot of respect there. So yeah, they feel like that's just one more point in their favor. Now, does it mean Bregman's going to take a much, much smaller deal to come to the Cubs than to go to Detroit? Or should the Blue Jays step up or something like that? Probably not. But I think he at least slightly, perhaps even moderately, prefers the Cubs over those other destinations. Then it becomes about, will you meet Scott Boras where he demands to be met so that you're paying a market price for the player?
Well, Matt, we appreciate you hopping on and trying to read the tea leaves here for us. And this is definitely, we are now on Bregman Watch 2025. Matt, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find your work and where they can find you on the socials?
I am on Blue Sky at matrueblood.bsky.social. Find everything that I write across, especially Northside Baseball for fans watching here, but I also write at Baseball Prospectus. And if you buy the Baseball Prospectus 2025 annual, I wrote all the player comments for the Cubs in there this year.
Great job, Matt. Thank you so much for jumping on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And all right, Crawly, feel any different about Bregman after talking to Matt?
I'm starting to believe. I'm starting to believe a little bit here.
All right. And what's your reaction? We got Matt's reaction. What do you think about the tweet that Nightingale put out? We have a lot of respect for Bob on this podcast.
I love Bob. I understand where he's coming from. And I think, again, this is, you know, you're playing a game of chicken with Scott Boras. He's done this before. He knows what he's doing. He knows to, again, you see with agents, a lot of times they put things out there and you try to get leverage from one team against another. Scott Boras is doing what he has to do for his client. The Cubs just got to see where they want to go with it.
This is the Fly the W670 podcast. It is episode 10 of season number 4. Alex Bregman to the Cubs rumors. Are they boiling over? Do us a favor. Leave us one of those 5-star reviews. Of course, you can listen, download, subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. You can email us at flythew670@gmail.com. Don't forget, watch us. That's right, on the Score YouTube page. In this segment, Crawly talks to Evan Altman, editor-in-chief of Cubs Insider, to talk about his recent article on the Brewers' dominance of the National League Central and what it means for the future Cubs president of baseball operations, Jed Hoyer.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got a real treat for you here tonight. We have the editor-in-chief of Cubs Insider, Evan Altman. Evan, how you doing?
I'm good. It's, outside of it being like freezing rain. I was just down in Tampa for a couple days, and now I come back to nasty Midwest weather. So, and it was when I left, it was like 60 and sunny here. My son's team had baseball practice outside on the day when I have to fly down to Tampa, and then when I come back, I get this weather. So I don't know. I could be doing better. I could be doing worse.
We met our annual meetup at CubsCon on Friday at Lizzie McNeil's, and actually CubsCon wasn't that bad weather-wise. Usually it's a lot more miserable, but I got a feeling like you probably have an Arizona trip coming up pretty soon, right?
Yeah, it's going to be, what are we at? I guess about a month and a half. I think I'll be there kind of later in the spring, 21st to the 25th, somewhere in that. Cubs have a nice little stretch of home games there right before my kids are, well, part of it, spring break kind of falling, so it makes it a little bit easier. I've got some other things lined up. So, yeah, looking forward to just spending a couple days out there. That's always one of the highlights of my year, just kind of going out and relaxing, kind of watching some games that in and of themselves don't necessarily matter, but then kind of like what you said, it's sort of a miniature CubsCon in terms of just catching up with a bunch of folks that maybe I don't get to see that often, and going down to the backfield, just kind of walking around and enjoying baseball. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
Over down by John Arguello way, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's hard. I'm not going to spring training this year, and it's like, oh man, but I've never been to Chase Field in Phoenix. I've never seen a game there. And so the Cubs are opening up their stateside campaign there, the 27th. So I'm going to be there. People laugh. I've been to Arizona numerous times, but I've never been anywhere other than ballparks and bars. And people are like, there's like more than ballparks and bars in Arizona. I'm like, yeah, really? So this year I'm going to Sedona. So okay. I'm going to do a week in Sedona, and then I'm heading out to go check out, like I said, Chase Field. I'm hoping I can get the pool for the second day, but we'll see what happens. But like, how awesome would that be if I got to just be in a Speedo and kind of strut around Chase Field, man? I don't know.
It might be awesome for you. I don't know about the other 25,000, 30,000 people there, but hey, if we'll be looking for you. It'll be easy to spot, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Now, the reason I wanted to have you on, Evan, besides picking your brilliant baseball brain, is that you saw the same tweet that I did. And this was the tweet that kind of talked about the number of days that your team, whatever team it is, and us being Cubs fans, has been in first place since 2020. And when you look at it for the Cubs, it doesn't look great there, falling in at number 18 at 92. And I got to tell you, Evan, the one thing that bothers me more than anything, and I know it probably shouldn't, like worry about your own team, but seeing the Houston Astros at 328 days, that's what we were supposed to be. That was that dynasty that we thought it would be, and Houston really kind of did it, and the Cubs didn't,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and I kind of wrote about that in a separate piece too, to where it's part of that was, it started as kind of a joke, right? Because the Cubs have gone out and acquired Kyle Tucker. Then they got Ryan Presley. Now there's the possibility of getting Alex Bregman. There's other guys that they've been looking at. And so it's like the Cubs tried, effectively they did. The Cubs and the Astros were almost parallel. The Astros maybe got started a year earlier, but they've experienced quite a bit more success. They've been to more World Series. They've won more World Series. They've done a much better job of not only developing the players that they had who were the early draft picks, but also finding those diamonds in the rough like Jose Altuve. The Cubs, on the other hand, have done a very poor job of developing anybody outside of their really high first-round draft picks that they've had historically. So you look at that and you're kind of like, it's that sustained success that the Cubs were promising us. And I'm upset by that. I'm also upset by looking at the Brewers up there as second to only the Dodgers in terms of how much. And, people say, well, what if the Brewers won? And while the answer is really nothing outside of, a playoff series, I think, right? That's about it. Yep. But that's missing the point. The point is that you're supposed to put yourself in a position to be competitive every single year. And we've seen so many times, whether it be the Diamondbacks or, the Phillies when they kind of busted through, or the Nats when they won their World Series. The ball just has to bounce your way a couple times, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's bad luck, but you put yourself there. Luck is right. What happens. Preparation meets opportunity. The Brewers have created far more opportunities over the last 5 seasons than the Cubs had.
And in your article, you talk about how the Brewers have led the Central for 468 days. And that being 169 more days than the Cardinals, the Cubs, the Pirates, and the Reds combined.
Yeah.
I mean, and I remember just sitting there last year and even Pacoda, like we were looking at this, we were talking about this the other day, you lost Corbin Burns, you lost Josh Hader, you lost Craig Counsell. This is the year that the Brewers are going to kind of go down. And it's like, nope, they're still there. And not only that, they're doing it while spending a lot less money.
Yeah, to me, that's the frustrating part, right? Is that whether the Cubs have ever wanted to admit it, and they haven't wanted to, about, are they in a rebuild? What exactly is this? The fact remains that even in their down years spending wise, they're outspending everybody else in the division. The Cardinals are 60 million less if you look at aggregate over those 5 years, which isn't a huge gap. But it's a massive gap to what the Brewers have spent, the Reds have spent, the Pirates have spent. And now we're seeing those teams, right? The Reds look like they're trying to be for real, bringing in Tito. The Pirates have done a great job of getting guys like Paul Skeens, some other hard throwers. So these are not teams that are pushovers. And so when you look at it, and I think the other thing in that time, the part that's really troubling to me is of those 92 days the Cubs have led the division, 56 of them came in the short 2020 season. So they've only led the division for 36 total days the last 4 years. That almost feels like you could make it happen by accident, right? Like that doesn't even feel like you're trying that hard.
Right. And I think like the Pirates probably have equivalent numbers to that. And so here's the thing that I kind of sit there and wonder, Evan, is obviously, Theo Epstein steps down November 17th, 2020, right? And he steps down from the role of president of baseball ops, and his number 2, right? The Robin to his Batman, the Watson to his Holmes, the ODB to his Method Man, right? Jed Hoyer, I had to put that in for you there,
yes,
but he comes in and, how much of this is Jed? How much of it is ownership? It's kind of like, is it the chicken or the egg? What came first? It's kind of like, did Theo leave noticing? Because we all noticed how in 2018, all of a sudden it seemed like the pocketbook closed up. And since then, we've heard the terms biblical losses, breaking even, all this stuff. It's just this constant reminder that we're not the Dodgers. We can't compete with those, all these things. And so I'm just wondering, would you say that Jed is doing an okay job based on the resources he's allocated, or would you say he's underperforming?
I mean, it's hard based on what I just said, right? And again, as you noted there, that 2020 season, which makes up more than half of those days easily that they've been in the lead, those came under Theo Epstein's ultimate leadership, right? And so Jed Hoyer has led the division less than the last 4 years under his leadership than Theo Epstein did for his final year. So I think the issue here, and it's really hard to come through if we talk about, kind of threading the needle. That's a phrase Hoyer likes to use a lot. And it's kind of a fancy way of saying to, make the most out of what we got, right? You have a smaller, if the eye of the needle is fairly small, it's going to be harder to thread. And so I do think, have there been some financial restrictions at times? Yes. But again, if we look at it relative to the Dodgers or the Mets or somebody like that, I think it's easy to look at it and say, well, Tom Ricketts isn't spending enough money. But then when you look at the division that they're in, with the Cubs being by far the largest market, and again, by far the most financial might, even when they're not spending to what a lot of people believe should be their capacity, it's hard to look at that and excuse the fact that they're not winning the division year after year. And so I've felt that, Theo Epstein was a really aggressive leader, right? Like he showed that with Boston. They kind of rewrote the way Moneyball worked. We saw him when he came into Chicago, taking some really big swings on guys, right? The biggest contracts in franchise history remain those that he signed outside of now Dansby Swanson, but that's really the Cubs' only marquee contract right now. No pun intended, right? And so it seemed like Hoyer was the guy who kind of tempered Theo Epstein. Like Epstein would maybe be a little bit more impulsive. Jed would come in and kind of balance him a little bit. And when you don't have that aggressive, I don't see Carter Hawkins as being that aggressive force to kind of balance out Hoyer. And so I think overall, we've seen this front office trend toward, lower ceilings, higher floors, and there just aren't as many. When he talks about trying to outperform expectations, that's great, and it's something that happens with every team that is successful. But they've compiled a roster that, outside now of Tucker, doesn't have a lot of guys who really have these high ceilings that they could reach. And so you're left with this team that, as we've seen the last couple of years, is just relatively mediocre. 83 wins, you're above 500, but not enough to be dangerous.
And so Jed is I don't know if he's, as far as what you can credit him with, like when we take a look at the farm system, he comes in 2021, and that's the year that they're going, everybody's contracts up. Bryant, Baez, Rizzo. He finally admitted the Schwarber mistake, but when you think about those guys being gone and rebuilding the farm system, in 2020, the Cubs were 21st. This just came out on Baseball America, right? So 2020, they were 21st is farm system, 2021, 22nd, 2022, 15, 2023, 17. And then last season, they were 4th, but now they're back kind of in that 15, in that mid-range right now. How much credit do you think Jed gets for the development of the farm system? I mean, there are 7 Cubs prospects in the top 100. They don't have that super high-end talent, that transcendent player, but they do have a lot of really good players in the system.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly gets some credit, but there again, I look at the Yu Darvish trade, and Owen Casey's the only player remaining in the system from that deal for a bunch of young guys. You look at some of the other trades that have worked out, like what's happening right now with the Chris Bryant trade. Caleb Killian hasn't been able to do much at the major league level, despite what he's shown in the minors. Alexander Canario looks like a guy without a spot anymore, as other guys have kind of exceeded that. I would give more of that credit to Dan Kantrovitz, who they brought in to run their draft. I mean, and Hoyer gets credit for that, right? Like he was part of that hire. He is Kantrovitz's boss, so to some extent. But I think more of the work that's been done is on the player evaluation side with guys that they're drafting or signing as international free agents. I have yet to see, again, they were praised so much for flipping Scott Effross, kind of the way they changed him up and managed to get Hayden Wesneski. But then again, he was incredibly inconsistent. Now he's out as part of that Kyle Tucker deal. So I don't really have a whole lot that I can say positively about the guys that have been acquired in all those trees outside of Pete Crow Armstrong. Like that's the one shining example of it felt like they really robbed the Mets, especially for how little the Mets got in terms of Javi Baez, basically, right? And so I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of this, and again, we're talking about top draft picks. We're talking about guys who were Matt Shaw and Cade Horton, who were taken among, in the first half of the draft. And there were college guys, a little more polished, who should move quickly. I still don't feel like we're seeing a whole lot of this with guys who were drafted lower, second round and beyond, or who maybe needed a little bit more polish to work through the system. And then what did that become? Because right now, again, outside of PCA, we really haven't seen an impact at the major league level yet. And we're still waiting on that.
Boy, I remember that Javi Baez trade, and you thought, boy, going to New York and getting to play with Francisco Lindor, like couldn't have been any more perfect. And boy, was that just a flop. But, obviously now that Jed's a little bit of I don't want to say a dead man walking, but as Joe Madden infamously said, it's my free agent year. It's Jed's free agent year. And so I don't think there's anyone that doesn't believe that if he doesn't make the postseason, he's gone, right?
I mean, I look at that a couple different ways. Because and this could depend too, your opinion on this, your mileage may vary, but I'm not completely sold, as obvious as this would be to some people, or some, it might fly directly in their face, but I don't know that ownership's primary goal is actually winning, at least not on a large scale. I think it's to keep a team that looks competent enough to keep butts in the seats and keep people engaged and buying marquee subscriptions. And so if Jed Hoyer does a good job of that, now, if we see another situation where he goes over the luxury tax and gets into penalties and they only win 83 games as a result, that I think is a different story. But if they produce a team but that said, it is absolute malpractice, given what we've talked about with the division, given how much money they're spending, given the acquisitions that they made and the projections that are out there, as much as you want to trust those, they kind of like not making the postseason would be a damning indictment of anyone else. Although I don't often see the Cubs from a top-down perspective as being entirely focused on, again, not just spending but the Mets and the Dodgers do not have room for failure, where they're going to either outspend it or they're going to start over and put more money into it and then do what needs to be done. The Cubs have not shown that they're willing and able to do that. So I don't know that it's necessarily a fireable offense if they don't make it. It should be. I don't know that it is.
No, you talked about Jed being kind of more of the, tempering Theo Epstein type thing, but that Kyle Tucker move was pretty surprising for Jed, knowing Jed and how he operates. 1 year of control for Kyle Tucker, and you gave up Cam Smith and, Isaac Paredes and Hayden Wesniewski we talked about, but do you think that was a move that Jed, say if he had 5 more years on his contract, would have made? Or do you think that maybe there was a little bit of added pressure to try to make this, to get that 4 or 5 WAR player in this lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely indicative of someone who knows that it may not necessarily be do or die, but he can't have another season like the last 2. And again, it goes to exactly what I had said when he made that statement about having players who need to outperform their expectations. That was made well before Kyle Tucker was in the fold. Right now, they might have been looking at him, but certainly they weren't aiming at that. And so that is a guy who, if you look at, and I think PCA is one of them that's got a very, very high ceiling if he continues to hit like he did in the second half. I think that's another guy who, could give you an extra 2, 3, 4 wins, right? But Tucker is that kind of a guy who can be a difference maker, even if it is only for 1 season, because at this point, I think rather than, if you got a 5-year contract, you can afford to look at years 3 and 4 as kind of where we really want to make things happen, right? But when you're kind of a lame duck, you really don't have much of a choice. And so, yeah, I thought the Morel for Paredes trade was one of those two that was a little bit more aggressive than we were used to seeing Hoyer make at the time, right? To swing that deal. And so this is kind of that coming full circle. And if they're able to do something with Alex Bregman, then that becomes another kind of a move that is kind of out of character for what Hoyer has done. Even if we do compare it to Cody Bellinger, I think this is a different story. So, yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely got to push his chips in because one way or the other, he's got to win.
And so now we take a look at this offseason, and we talked about Kyle Tucker, but you got Ryan Presley, Matthew Boyd, Carson Kelly, John Birdie, you got bench options, you got Eli Morgan, you got Ryan Brasier, who they just added. I mean, as far as looking at this offseason right now, Bregman can change everything right away. But what grade would you give Jed Hoyer right now for this 2025 offseason?
I'll give him a solid B minus even. I'm a little concerned with some of what they didn't pursue. When we look at the Tanner Scott deal and how that kind of got away from them, and how it certainly seemed as though Scott wanted to be in Chicago, but there's a lot of temporary measures, right? And that's the part that that concerns me, right? Because you could be left in the same situation all over again next winter, where you've still got to go replace all these guys, regardless of what level of success they achieve. And I think they're pretty well set up to do at least moderately well in the division, right? I think they'll be okay there. Playoffs are a different story, but I don't like having all these guys who were, again, just that 1 year. You can't really bank on anything. And you certainly, as much as prospect huggers, I'll call them that, would love to see every single prospect come up and be awesome and fill out the lineup. That's not realistic either. It's not going to happen. And so I think there's still 1 or 2 more moves that have to be made, even if we're just talking and Bregman might be that, right, to where it's a 4-year deal, and I'm sure there'll be options, but that at least provide you a little bit of security and continuity, I think is really the big key going forward. So you're not just, it's not like a college basketball team where you have to refill everybody with NIL deals, every year. And I don't think that's really helpful. So I guess we'll see, but it's a B, because I think the division's weak enough that you don't have to have an A in order to win it.
And so we had Craig Goldstein on from Baseball Perspectives, 90 wins. Where would you put the Cubs as far as win total for this year in 2025?
I think that's fair. I think they've done enough to elevate. I think I actually nailed 83 2 years ago. I think I said 85 last year, and they came shy of that. But based on what I've seen, and I think the bullpen in particular, having that solid bullpen that's ideally, right, knock wood, not going to cost them so many games early on that Craig Counsell doesn't have to figure out over 2 or 3 months, like, who do I have in here who I can trust, right? That circle of trust is built. So I think 90 is a pretty solid 90 to 92. I'd probably be going that high on. I think it's about as high as I'll get, but that's a great season if that's the deal, and you can win the division with that and have, a meaningful run.
Now, obviously, the concern about having to do this all next year aside, right now, if you were to say my one fear of the 2025 season, injuries, we're not going to look in that, but if you had one fear or one area that you just think is really still deficient, where do you see this Cubs team still needing to add when you talk about adding pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest concern is that they just in general, they still don't have a great deal of power, right? That is an area where they'll struggle. And even if Matt Shaw does what we think he can do, there's nobody there when we saw that success, when it happened in 2015, with Bryant and Schwarber and Baez all coming up, all living up to the hype all at once. Like, that, I think, ruined a lot of people's perspective on how things normally work with prospects. It doesn't usually happen to where you've got a guy who comes up and is, like, again, with KB, it's still kind of shocking to see how successful he was at every single level as he came up. There was no adjustment period, nothing. He just stepped right in, rookie of the year, MVP. He was on a pace to be an all-time great. Injuries kind of derailed that, and then the trade, but there's nobody in the system as good as we think Matt Shaw can be, or maybe you love you some Owen Casey or Kevin Alcantara. None of those guys is Chris Bryant. None of them's Anthony Rizzo. None of them's even Javi Baez. I don't want to short shrift Javi because that's another guy who was MVP conversation for 2 or 3 seasons there. There's not even a Kyle Schwarber who you see moving up and providing, like, immediately coming up and providing that impact power. So that's what concerns me, is that the floor is high, as I said earlier. I just don't know who's there that markedly ratchets up the ceiling. And that's what this club needs more. You can't just have a bunch of guys who are good to very good. They need some great players. And I don't know where they find those outside of possibly, maybe one of those guys blossoms into that. I just don't know that I see it right now.
All right. And Craig Counsell, what are you looking for in year 2? Obviously he has the lay of the land. What do you see happening as far as Craig Counsell this season? Do you think we're going to see kind of things operate a little bit differently this time around?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I kind of hinted at that earlier. It felt like, and again, this was a guy who had played for the Brewers, who had kind of hung around in their front office for a while before he became the manager, who had a little bit more say, I think, in not only, player acquisitions, but kind of development stuff, and seeing these guys come up through the system, was intimately familiar with the way the Brewers did things and who they had personnel-wise, top to bottom. Coming into Chicago the way he did, he didn't have that same grasp of exactly who all these guys were. And so that's what I'm looking for, a little bit more, him being more comfortable with that, having a better scope of kind of, here's my pitching staff in particular. Here are the guys who are going to really be, my ride or dies as far as the back end. And then here's how we can slot guys into the middle. So bullpen management is going to be, to me, the biggest thing, because that was the difference between them winning 83 games last year and possibly winning 90 plus if they just don't blow a bunch of those saves early on.
Well, Evan, I appreciate you jumping on, giving us a little time. Again, that article, if people are interested, is at Real Cub Insider, and that's where our listeners can find all of your work, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Just check out Cubs Insider. It's at Real Cubs Insider on Twitter. You want to just go search Cubs Insider out there. Look for us on Facebook, wherever you prefer to kind of take in your Cubs news, and we'll hopefully be there for you.
All right, Evan. And again, appreciate you jumping on, and hopefully, like I said, the Cubs exceed all our expectations.
Hope so, man. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
This is episode 10 of season number 4 of the Fly the W 670 podcast. Alex Bregman to the Cubs. Rumors are boiling over. Don't forget, and we ask you to please leave us one of those 5-star reviews. All right, Crawly, it's time to round the bases, where we give all the latest Cubs info and the news from around the league. Let's start off with the hot stove. And I guess bad news for Cub fans is Pete Alonso sticking in New York a 2-year, $54 million deal.
Yeah, I wasn't all disappointed. It just never seemed like it was going to happen. So it was never in my mind. When you take a look, it's got a 10 million signing bonus. He's going to make 30 million this season. There's an opt out at the end of the season. And if he stays, he'll make 24 million in year 2. Dustin, it's hard to say who had a better offseason, the Mets or the Dodgers, but it wouldn't be shocking if we have another LA, New York World Series. Well, it would be shocking, but I mean, seeing those guys in the NLCS wouldn't be that shocking, in my opinion.
All right.
I mean,
I think it's a ton of protection. I think it's a ton of protection, right, in that lineup. It makes that lineup a lot better, right? I mean, if he was not in that lineup, you could poke some holes in it, right?
Right. It's just the amount of depth it adds. And again, he's very well liked in the clubhouse. You know how much his teammates were going to bat for him during this whole process. And you saw how he performed in the postseason last year. So, I mean, that really is something that you got to look out for. Now, Dustin, we have a old friend, Tommy Pham from the Cardinals and the White Sox and 8 other teams besides that. He signed a 1-year deal with the Pirates. So Tommy and his fantasy football league moved back to the NL Central. Just don't get in that league. You might get punched. The Houston Astros signed outfielder Ben Gamel to a 1-year, $1.2 million deal. And then left-hander reliever Tim Hill and the Yankees agreed to 1-year, $2.85 million contract. But Dustin, again, now it's really Bregman or bust when you're talking about free agents. I mean, there's some pitchers out there. There's arms, there's bodies, there's inning eaters, but Bregman is about it when you look at it after the Pete Alonso signing.
Sure does.
Now, this story is an interesting one. We have an umpire fired for gambling ties, and it's a story to keep an eye on. MLB has fired umpire Pat Hoberg after he shared sports betting accounts with a professional poker player who bet on baseball. In a news release issued on Monday, the league found no evidence Hoberg manipulated games and said that the data provided by the sportsbook do not show any baseball bets from his own electronic devices. So basically, he was sharing an account, but it never came off of his phone or his laptop or anything like that. The league found that the poker player bet on baseball via the account they shared, including 8 games that Hoberg was involved with as an on-field umpire or a replay official. Now, they found no evidence that the umpire was involved in these bets or manipulated the games. They looked at, games that he was the home plate umpire. His zone was pretty much, actually a pretty decent zone. And so the one thing, though, is that he deleted messages that were central to the investigation, Dustin.
Yeah, and that's where you start getting a little fishy, right?
Right. Of those 8 games, one of them was a Cubs game that was bet on June 15th, 2021. Hoberg was the lead replay official for the Cubs versus the Mets. There was not a single replay review, so he didn't factor. His friend bet $1,050 on the Cubs and won $1,550, even though the Cubs lost that game 3-2. We don't know what the odds are, right? And so, it might have been the Cubs plus a couple runs here and there. I don't know what the bet was. Tyjon Walker took the win. Alec Mills took the loss, and Javi Baez hit a 2-run homer for the Cubs. But, Dustin, this has been something we've been worried about the entire time. We talked about Faye Vincent passing away on the last episode, and he said if you ever get into this gambling, sooner or later there's going to be corruption of some kind.
But I want to say this, okay? And I'm not disagreeing, but I want to say this. The legalized sports gambling does help the policing of sports gambling, because otherwise we would never know, to your point, that this friend of the umpires bet and won what he did and on what date he did.
Here's what I'm going to tell you real quickly though on that. And I would say that, okay, I understand that, but I am still very much of the belief that if you get caught gambling or being involved in gambling in baseball, you are banned. I don't want to hear about reinstatements. I don't want to hear about
that's a whole nother story. I'm just talking about like why it's not like legal. It's all legalized gambling's fault. Legalized gambling also helps police this. Without legalized gambling, this could be going on. It would be much harder to catch, is my point.
I agree with your point. I'm just saying that there was always, since the Black Sox scandal, 1919, there was always a sign that said, if you get caught gambling on baseball, you will be banned. And that's what I want to continue. I don't want any opportunity for anyone to get back in the game. This
right.
has to be a death penalty. If you get caught, you're out, you're done. If Hoberg, the umpire, had any kind of pension, it's gone. I want it wiped. I want the consequences to be
pension
severe.
wiped. Pension
Yes.
wiped.
Yes, pension wiped. That would be a consequence to me. I want this to make sure that the integrity of the game is not getting screwed with.
That is hardcore, Crawly. That is a very firm, stiff reaction to you on that. All right, something else I know that you are stiff about and really into is this 2025 Caribbean Series.
Yeah, it's been exciting.
Pun intended, by the way. Pun intended, by the way.
Well, the Caribbean Cities series has been pretty interesting. The semifinals was held on Wednesday night. Albert Pujols, Dominican Republic team, beat Henry Blanco's Venezuelan team 5-4 in 11 innings to punch their ticket to the final. They will face Mexico, who beat Puerto Rico 3-1 in the semifinal. And so Mexico, Dustin, continues to have good showings in these international tournaments lately. You know, it used to always be like, obviously Cuba was big forever. And then there was like DR and Venezuela, but I keep seeing Mexico just, you know, I feel like we're going to continue to see an influx of talent from our southern neighbors. We have Javier Assad on the Cubs from Mexico. I think that's going to continue. And so it's going to be a fun watch. The third place game takes place between Puerto Rico and Venezuela tonight, Thursday night when we're recording this, 8 p.m. Central. And the final between the teams, Mexico and the DR, is going to be Friday at 8 p.m. All games broadcast on MLB Network.
Very cool. Something to keep the baseball fan going. But gosh, Crawly, we are so close. I mean, we are so close. Of course, football's got their final big weekend coming up. But I mean, gosh, also the day of the Super Bowl is also the day that Cubs pitchers and catchers are due in Arizona. So, I mean, it is absolutely, positively right around the corner. And that also means that we'll have spring training games on the Marquee Sports Network and my employer, 670 The Score.
Absolutely. On Wednesday, Marquee released the schedule for the games they will be calling for spring training and the Tokyo series. So Marquee starts their spring training broadcast schedule is going to start on February 21st against guess what team? The Dodgers. Here we go here, but it's really, you can take a look here. They're all home games. I don't see them doing any away games, so I think that's probably just because they're going to have everything set up there. And I haven't heard anything, Dustin. I don't know if you have either, whether there's going to be any remote calling of the games or if they're actually going to be there for all these games.
Good question. I don't have that information. I will try to dig in a little bit.
Right, but
I've got a good source.
We got games against the Dodgers, the White Sox, the Rangers, the D-backs, Angels, Guardians, Reds, Padres, Royals. Now, for fans that are really interested, Dustin, this kills me just because I went to Arizona last season, and this was going to be the premiere of the spring breakout game with the prospects, and it got rained out. And so that's going to be happening on March 15th against the prospects of the LA Angels. So you're not going to want to miss that one. And then
February 22nd is the first game, right? Against the Sox?
21st against the Dodgers.
Oh, I thought it was the 22nd against the
22nd is the White Sox, and that game will be broadcast as well. And then, like we said, March 15th is the breakout game. One other thing to keep in mind, there's a rare exhibition matchup. Cubs against the Atlanta Braves of the Grapefruit League. They will visit Arizona on March 24th and 25th for 2 games. And so I did this one time. The Cubs were going to be opening up the series against Boston. And so they played 2 games in Fort Myers at the spring training home of the Red Sox. So it was a rare opportunity to see the Cubs and the Red Sox. They do this usually when a team has to fly to the West Coast. They'll kind of jump in early and then kind of play a couple games, or vice versa. If a team is going from, like, say, spring training to the East Coast, they'll get in a little bit early, get used to the weather. So that's going to be exciting as well. And like you said, there's going to be games on 670, The Score, which is exciting. And don't forget, in the middle of that whole spring training is going to be the Tokyo series. And so Marquee's broadcast team is going to be in Tokyo March 14th to air the game. We talked about this against Hanshin at 10 p.m. Central Time. And the March 16th contest against Yomiuri, the Giants, and that's going to be at 5 a.m. Central Time on the Marquee live on the network and the Marquee Sports Network.
So
app.
those are spring training games in Japan.
Right. So remember,
these aren't the Dodger games we're talking about. These are get revved up, get your feet on the ground in Japan against Japanese baseball team.
Correct. So the first thing, they're going to have 2 games that day on the 14th. The Cubs play Hanshin first at 10 p.m. Central Time, and then the Dodgers are going to play the Yomiuri Giants at 5 a.m. Central Time, and then they flip it the next time on March 16th. So the Dodgers get the early game and the Cubs get the late game. And then when they have their 2 games, that's when they're going to when we take a look at the lineup, that's when they have the first games of the season. They're going to be playing those games, as well. So, and not only that, but we also have friend of the podcast, Cole Wright, is going to have Cubs 360. That's going to be from Arizona, and that premieres Sunday, February 9th at 3 p.m. Central Time before the Super Bowl. So don't bother with the Puppy Bowl. Go to Marquee. And then new episodes are scheduled at 6 p.m. Central Time, February 10th, 12th, 14th, 17th, and 19th. Dustin, Marquee's on my channel 24/7, but now I'm going to be glued to the TV knowing that we're going to have some content. And speaking of Marquee Network, Dustin, Jeff Agris, friend of the pod, he's been on before. He's the deputy sports editor for the Sun-Times, was the first to break this story on Wednesday night. Friend of the pod, Alex Cohen, will be backup play-by-play voice for the Cubs broadcast on Marquee Sports Network starting this season. So obviously,
no more rotations, no more Pat jumping in, no more Zach jumping in, no Beth Mowens. Okay, so we will have Pat, Ron, and Zach on the radio side only.
Right. And so I think, everybody just loves Pat on the radio. Not saying Pat's great. It doesn't matter where you put Pat. Pat could, I know Vince Scully did this one time. He read a grocery list and it sounded great. Like, Pat is great wherever when he's on the podcast, when I've interviewed him on this podcast, I just sit there and barely say 2 words and he's rolling. It's like, you just let the guy do his thing. So, it doesn't matter where you put him, but something about Pat on the radio to me is just old time. You know what I mean? It's classic baseball broadcasting, and the rapport that he's gotten with Ron Coomer is just improved. So it's just so good right now. It's like they're just on it. And so, Dustin, I've known Alex Cohen for the last 3-4 years. He's been on this podcast, especially during baseball season, at least once a month. I can tell you, not only is he a fantastic broadcaster, we got to hear him do a couple games last year. He is just a wonderful human being, just a great person. And we are blessed as Cub fans, and we've talked about it. Our broadcast, whether you're talking about TV broadcast, whether you're talking about radio broadcast, whether you're talking about minor league broadcasters, Sam Wiederhoff or BK in South Bend, Brendan King, or whether you're talking about Mick Gillespie in Tennessee, we are spoiled. I don't think people realize how lucky we are to have great broadcast. And I just feel like this move strengthens the TV as far as having, someone that Cub fans really truly know. And it's not like, oh, who's on today? We don't know. It's going to allow these guys to create a little bit of rapport as far as on the TV side, right? As far as JD and Alex Cohen, I think it's just going to work out great. And I'm super excited for Alex and just wish him all the best.
Yep, I do too. He's been great to the podcast. I like his work. So he will continue with his AAA job, though, correct? He's just going to be the guy that will be here, right?
That is yet to be determined. I haven't heard one thing or another on that.
Okay, so he may be like an employee of the Cubs all the time at the major league level.
If it is, I haven't heard it yet, but
so we don't know that role. His exact role is TBD. Other than we know that when there is an opening on the TV side, he will be it.
Absolutely. And you know what? If he's with Iowa, then great. If he's with the Cubs, all the time, great. Either way, I just like there's only 30 of these jobs that open up, right, Dustin? And right. If, I want the best for Alex, and I'm sure if all of a sudden a major league job opens, you got to take that, right? No matter what city, even if it's the Cardinals, you got to take it. Even if it's the White Sox, you got to take it. And so I'm just glad that Alex stays within the Cubs family, and so I'm happy for him.
Absolutely. Well, that's a wrap. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Follow on all the socials. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. You can email Crawly and I, flythew670gmail.com, and you can watch us by subscriing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel. Crawly, before we go, will you at least watch the Super Bowl? I mean, do you have the snacks? Do you get into a square pool? Do you watch halftime? Do you do it with buddies? Does the family get together? How does the Crawly crew take in big game number 59?
We will be here at the clubhouse. I have an 85-inch TV over there. I got 2 screens behind me, so we'll have 3 screens going. We will have barbecue. We will have snacks. We have a prop bet sheet that we all throw in a little bit of money on, and I do have my squares. So I am never one to turn down a good party, but honestly, the Super Bowl is a celebration for me when football ends and baseball is welcome back in everybody's lives. And now I don't have to listen to football talk. I can just talk baseball all the time like I always do.
Very good. Enjoy the games. We'll be back early next week.
Yes, sir. Pitchers and catchers on Sunday. This is it. We've made it, sports fans. Go Cubs! Hey guys, it's Crawly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs!